Over the Solomon Sea, August 1942, just after 0900 hours, the thin, ragged cumulus stretched across the expanse offered a deceptive promise of sanctuary. A promise Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya, leading the Zero fighters of the Shokaku Air Group, had come to rely upon. These clouds, which had so often provided cover for his dive bombers and torpedo planes against the nascent American fighter screens during the initial thrusts across the Pacific, now felt less like a benevolent shield and more like a fragile, translucent curtain. The stakes were immediate and absolute. The survival of his strike force, tasked with crippling the American carrier Enterprise, hinged on exploiting every nuance of the atmospheric conditions. Yet the nature of the aerial conflict was shifting, subtly but irrevocably. Itaya, a veteran of the China incident and the Pearl Harbor attack, had long mastered the art of the cloud-based ambush. His pilots, trained to a razor-sharp edge, would often climb above the wisps, then dive through a break, surprising unsuspecting enemy formations. The Mitsubishi A6M20, with its phenomenal climb rate and agility, was an ideal instrument for this tactic. Its Sake 12 engine, rated at 940 horsepower for takeoff, allowed it to gain altitude rapidly, often reaching 6,000 meters in just over 7 minutes, a performance metric that frequently outstripped early Allied fighters. This superior vertical performance, combined with the Zero's extended range, allowed Itaya's pilots to loiter above potential targets, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to strike from the sun or the cloud. The construction of the Zero itself underscored this aggressive philosophy. Its lightweight duralumin airframe, meticulously engineered for minimal drag and maximum maneuverability, sacrificed armor protection for performance. The pilot's seat, for instance, offered no ballistic steel plate, a design choice predicated on the belief that superior piloting and aggressive tactics would negate the need for passive defense. The fuel tanks, too, lacked self-sealing capabilities, a decision that contributed significantly to the aircraft's lightweight and extended range, but also rendered it highly vulnerable to incendiary rounds. These design choices, while enabling the Zero's early dominance, also established a fundamental vulnerability that would become increasingly apparent as the conflict progressed. Production logs from the Mitsubishi and Nakajima factories indicated that by mid-1942, over 3,000 A6M variants had been delivered, a testament to Japan's industrial capacity and its commitment to this particular aircraft design. This numerical superiority, coupled with the unparalleled skill of its initial cadre of pilots, fostered a tactical doctrine that emphasized offensive action and the exploitation of environmental factors. The clouds were not merely weather. They were an extension of the aircraft's capabilities, a third dimension in the tactical equation, allowing for concealment and surprise. Itaya's unit, having participated in numerous engagements from the Philippines to Ceylon, had perfected this doctrine, often reporting overwhelming success against Allied aircraft that seemed unable to counter their vertical attacks. The strategic implication of this cloud-fighting doctrine was profound. It allowed the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service to project power across vast oceanic distances, often with fewer aircraft than their opponents, by maximizing the effectiveness of each sortie. The psychological impact on Allied pilots, who often found themselves ambushed from above or emerging from cloud banks into a hail of cannon fire, was considerable, contributing to the perception of the Zero as an almost invincible opponent. This perception, however, was built upon a foundation of specific advantages that were not immutable, and the very reliance on these advantages would, in time, expose a critical flaw. The clouds, once a steadfast ally, were beginning to lose their opaque quality. The clouds, often towering cumulus formations born of the Pacific's humidity, offered more than just meteorological phenomena. They were tactical assets, woven into the very fabric of Japanese naval air doctrine. American naval aviators, particularly those flying F-4F Wildcats and F-6F Hellcats, frequently reported engagements initiated or broken off by Japanese fighters and bombers that deliberately sought refuge within these massive white bastions. This pattern of behavior was meticulously logged in after-action reports, debriefings, and intelligence summaries, forming a growing body of evidence that highlighted a distinct operational preference. Damage reports from early 1942, for instance, frequently noted enemy aircraft emerging from or disappearing into cloud banks during strafing runs against Allied shipping. One such report from the USS Lexington after the Battle of the Coral Sea detailed A-6M Zeros making repeated passes, each time retreating into a nearby cloud system before American defensive fire could effectively concentrate. The Zeros, with their exceptional maneuverability, could leverage the three-dimensional chaos of the cloud cover to disorient pursuers and set up new attack vectors. This reliance was not accidental. It stemmed from a foundational element of Japanese air combat training, which emphasized surprise and evasion. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, with its long range and agility, was designed for offensive strikes far from home bases, where friendly ground-based radar or extensive fighter screens were often absent. In such environments, natural concealment became paramount, and the cloud deck provided a mobile, ubiquitous shield. Its light construction, prioritizing range and maneuverability over armor, also made evasion a critical component of pilot survival, reinforcing the tactical utility of cloud cover. Interrogation files from captured Japanese pilots later corroborated this doctrinal emphasis. Pilots spoke of specific training exercises that involved simulated attacks and evasions using cloud formations as integral elements of the scenario. They were taught to use the visual discontinuity of clouds to break contact, to mask their approach, and to reposition for subsequent attacks, often without the benefit of sophisticated radar guidance. The cloud was not merely an obstacle. It was an extension of their tactical toolkit, a dynamic landscape to be exploited. The sheer scale of the Pacific theater, with its vast stretches of open ocean, meant that meteorological conditions often dictated the rhythm of air operations. Unlike the more confined European skies, where ground control and extensive radar networks became increasingly prevalent, the Pacific offered fewer fixed reference points. Consequently, pilots were compelled to rely more heavily on their own observational skills and the natural environment for tactical advantage, and the ubiquitous cloud formations provided a readily available solution to the challenges of concealment and surprise. This consistent operational pattern revealed a strategic vulnerability, a predictable element within an otherwise unpredictable aerial battlefield. The Japanese pilots trusted the clouds implicitly, believing them to be inviolable sanctuaries against detection and attack. This trust, born of doctrine and circumstance, would eventually become a significant factor in the evolving tactics of their adversaries. England, 1940. The Battle of Britain raged in the skies, but often the skies themselves were the enemy, cloaking German bombers in dense cloud cover, rendering visual interception impossible. This fundamental limitation of human sight, even aided by binoculars, meant that a significant portion of enemy sorties could proceed unmolested, delivering their payloads with impunity when weather conditions favored them. The stakes were nothing less than the continued integrity of British air defenses, and by extension, the survival of the nation under relentless aerial assault. The early chain-home radar system, a triumph of pre-war foresight, provided crucial early warning, but its long wavelengths, typically operating between 10 and 13 meters, offered insufficient resolution to direct fighters precisely to targets hidden within cloud formations. These early systems, while effective for broad area detection and tracking of formations, struggled with individual aircraft identification and suffered from significant ground clutter, especially at lower altitudes. The large antenna arrays required for these wavelengths further limited their mobility and tactical deployment. Damage reports from coastal towns consistently cited instances where bombers, after initial detection, simply vanished into thick weather, only to reappear over their targets. Fighter command dispatches from the period frequently contained frustrated notations regarding lost contact in cloud or visual acquisition impossible. This persistent tactical blind spot underscored the urgent need for a detection method that could penetrate atmospheric obscurities, offering a new dimension to air defense. The theoretical groundwork for microwave generation had been laid in the 1930s, but practical application remained elusive until the development of the cavity magnetron. This device, conceived and refined at the University of Birmingham, transformed electrical energy into high-power microwave radiation, specifically in the centimeter wavelength range. Its compact size and remarkable efficiency, generating pulses of several kilowatts at wavelengths as short as 10 centimeters, represented a profound leap in radar technology. The magnetron's ability to produce these short wavelengths was critical. Shorter wavelengths allowed for much smaller antennas to achieve the same directional precision as much larger, longer wavelength arrays. This miniaturization meant that radar sets could be installed directly onto aircraft, transforming them from passive recipients of ground-based information into active hunters. The focused beam of centimeter wave radar also offered superior angular resolution, enabling operators to distinguish individual aircraft within a formation and to track them with unprecedented accuracy. Production logs from Metropolitan Vickers and GEC indicate an initial output of fewer than 50 magnetrons per month in late 1940, rapidly escalating to over 200 units monthly by mid-1941 as manufacturing processes were streamlined and demand surged. This rapid scaling was a testament to the perceived strategic value of the technology, with significant national resources diverted to its development and manufacture. The meticulous hand assembly of the magnetron's resonant cavities, often involving precise copper machining, spoke to the high-stakes engineering involved. The strategic implication was immediate and profound. Night fighters, previously reliant on visual contact or cumbersome ground-controlled interception, could now carry their own eyes into the darkness and through the clouds. This capability directly addressed the vulnerability exposed by German night bombing raids and cloudy daytime conditions. The introduction of airborne interception, AI radar, specifically the AI Mark IV, operating at 1.5 meters, followed by the much more effective AI Mark VII and Mark VIII using centimeter wavelengths, began to shift the balance of power in the nocturnal skies. Interrogation files of captured Luftwaffe aircrew from late 1941 onwards frequently contained bewildered accounts of being intercepted in conditions of zero visibility, often without any prior visual warning. These reports, initially dismissed as pilot error or extreme luck on the part of British fighters, gradually accumulated, painting a picture of an invisible threat. The psychological impact on bomber crews, knowing they could be detected and engaged regardless of cloud cover or darkness, began to erode morale. The transition from early long-wave radar to compact, high-frequency microwave systems represented not merely an incremental improvement, but a fundamental paradigm shift in aerial warfare. The clouds, once a reliable sanctuary, were becoming transparent to an increasingly sophisticated array of electronic sensors. The advantage of concealment, long a tactical staple for attacking forces, was slowly but inexorably being stripped away by the silent, unseen pulses of radar. The Night Above Rabaul, 1943. Japanese pilots, accustomed to the enveloping darkness and the protective shroud of cloud cover, began to report an unsettling phenomenon. Bursts of anti-aircraft fire appearing with unnerving accuracy through layers of obscuring weather. This new precision challenged their fundamental assumptions about aerial warfare, where visual acquisition had long been the prerequisite for effective defense. The stakes were immediate and existential. Their perceived sanctuary in the skies was dissolving. The mechanism behind this shift was a complex interplay of electromagnetic waves and mechanical computation. Ground-based radar units, specifically the SCR-268 and later the SCR-584, emitted pulsed radio energy into the night sky. These pulses, traveling at the speed of light, would strike an airborne target and reflect back to a receiver antenna, creating a distinct echo. The time delay between emission and reception, coupled with the directionality of the antenna, allowed for the precise calculation of an aircraft's range, azimuth, and elevation. The SCR-268, an early iteration, operated on a frequency of approximately 200 MHz, utilizing a Yagi antenna array that could be manually aimed to sweep the sky. Its range was limited to about 30,000 yards, and its accuracy, while revolutionary, still required considerable human interpretation. Damage reports from Japanese aircraft began to show consistent shrapnel patterns, indicating that bursts were now occurring within a 50-yard radius of their position, even when no visual contact was possible from the ground. The SCR-584, introduced later in the Pacific Theater, represented a significant leap forward. Operating at a higher frequency of 2,800 MHz, it featured a parabolic dish antenna capable of automatic tracking once a target was acquired. This system provided continuous data streams to an analog computer, typically the M9 gun data computer. The M9, a marvel of electromechanical engineering, took the radar's real-time positional data, factored in ballistic trajectories for various anti-aircraft rounds, wind speed, and the predicted flight path of the target, then continuously calculated the required lead angles for the guns. Production logs indicate that by late 1943, over 1,500 SCR-584 units had been deployed across various Allied theaters, with a substantial number reaching the Pacific. Each unit, weighing approximately 20,000 pounds, required a crew of 6 to operate effectively, ensuring constant calibration and maintenance in often harsh tropical conditions. The strategic implication was profound. Air superiority, previously contested primarily through visual dogfights and daylight bombing, now extended into the realm of instrument flight and nighttime operations, fundamentally altering the calculus of risk for attacking forces. The ideological impact on Japanese aircrews was significant. Their doctrine had long emphasized the importance of individual skill and daring, often relying on the element of surprise and the cover of darkness or weather to approach targets. The sudden appearance of accurate, invisible flak eroded this confidence, transforming what was once a calculated risk into a lottery where the odds were increasingly stacked against them. Their reliance on the natural environment for concealment was systematically undermined by a technology that saw through the very elements they trusted. The roar of the engines, a familiar comfort in the vastness of the Pacific sky, was now punctuated by a new, unsettling rhythm. Japanese pilots, accustomed to the sanctuary of cloud cover, found their formations suddenly breaking under unseen blows. On November 20th, 1943, during the initial phases of the Tarawa landings, a flight of G-4M Betty bombers, approaching the island at 12,000 feet, was met with a barrage of flak that seemed to materialize from the very air around them. 3 aircraft, caught in the invisible net, spiraled into the ocean before their crews could even identify the source of the attack. The American destroyers and battleships, arrayed in a defensive perimeter around the invasion fleet, were now equipped with the Mark 37 gunfire control system, a complex assembly of gyroscopes, servo mechanisms, and, crucially, the new Mark IV radar. This radar, operating at a wavelength of 70 centimeters, could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 20 miles, even through thick cloud layers that rendered optical sighting impossible. The radar's antenna, a large, rotating bedspring array, fed precise range and bearing data into the fire control computer, which then continuously calculated lead angles and fuse settings for the anti-aircraft guns. Before the introduction of radar-guided fire control, anti-aircraft engagement relied almost entirely on visual acquisition, limiting effective engagement to clear weather conditions and daylight hours. A typical 5-inch 38 caliber naval gun, firing at a target at 10,000 feet, had an effective ceiling of approximately 11,300 feet and a maximum rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute. However, the probability of a hit against a maneuvering aircraft was exceedingly low without accurate predictive targeting. Damage reports from early 1942 indicate that hundreds of rounds were often expended for a single claimed kill, and many of these claims were unconfirmed. With the Mark IV radar, the engagement envelope expanded dramatically. The system could track a target continuously, providing real-time updates to the gun directors. Even when the aircraft was completely obscured, this capability negated the Japanese tactic of using cloud cover for concealment during attack runs or evasive maneuvers. The psychological impact on the pilots was profound. The clouds, once a shield, had become a trap, offering no protection from the unseen fire that now reached up through them. The strategic implication of this technological leap was immediate and devastating for the Japanese air forces. Their operational doctrine, which heavily favored night attacks and cloud-shrouded approaches to exploit the limitations of Allied visual targeting, was rendered obsolete. The attrition rates for Japanese aircraft attempting to interfere with Allied amphibious operations began to climb sharply, even when weather conditions were deemed unfavorable for air defense. Production logs from Mitsubishi and Nakajima for the G4M bomber show a steady output of approximately 60 aircraft per month throughout 1943, but the rate of operational losses began to outpace replacements in critical feeders, particularly the Central Pacific. The pilots, who had learned to trust the vast, indifferent embrace of the clouds, found that trust betrayed by the cold, calculating reach of radar. The familiar white expanse, once a promise of safety, now held the unseen threat of bursting shells. Over the Solomon Sea, late 1942. The Mitsubishi A6M0, its sleek lines a familiar sight against the tropical sky, banked gently, the pilot seeking the solace of a burgeoning cumulus formation. For months, these towering white fortresses had offered sanctuary, a place to regroup, to hide from pursuing Allied fighters, to descend unobserved upon unsuspecting convoys. This tactic, honed in the skies over China and perfected across the vast Pacific, relied on the inherent limitations of early radar and the visual constraints of aerial combat. The Zero, with its exceptional maneuverability and range, often operated at altitudes where cloud cover was a reliable tactical asset. Pilots were trained to use the weather, to treat the dense vapor as a shield, an extension of their aircraft's capabilities. Damage reports from earlier engagements consistently noted Zeros disappearing into cloud banks, only to reappear minutes later, often from an unexpected vector, continuing their attack or making a clean escape. This reliance on natural concealment became a cornerstone of their operational doctrine. Then a flicker, not a distant explosion, but a sudden, sharp burst of light from within the cloud itself, directly ahead of the Zero. A moment later, a thin, luminous stream, a tracer round, arced upwards, seemingly originating from the very heart of the vapor. This was not the expected trajectory of ground-based anti-aircraft fire, nor was it the telltale signature of an attacking fighter. It was a violation of the perceived safety of the clouds. The pilot instinctively pulled back on the stick, the Zero shuddering as it climbed away from the unexpected threat. More tracers followed, now forming a pattern, crisscrossing the space where the aircraft had been moments before. These rounds, glowing with magnesium, were clearly visible, even against the bright white of the cloud, their path undeniable. They were coming from through the cloud, not from below it, nor from its edges. Interrogation files from captured Japanese aircrew later detailed the profound psychological impact of these encounters. Pilots described a feeling of disorientation, a sudden erosion of a fundamental tactical assumption. The clouds, once allies, now seemed to betray them, their opacity no longer a guarantee of invisibility. The source of the fire remained a mystery during the initial encounters, adding to the unsettling nature of the experience. The immediate operational consequence was a shift in flight profiles. Pilots became more hesitant to dive into cloud cover without first assessing its density and potential for concealed threats. Reconnaissance flights were dispatched specifically to observe Allied naval movements and their associated air defense capabilities, searching for explanations. The traditional reliance on weather for tactical advantage began to wane, replaced by a growing caution. Later analysis of Allied naval reports and technical specifications revealed the culprit: radar-directed anti-aircraft fire, specifically the Mark 37 gun director paired with the SG radar, mounted on cruisers and destroyers. This system could track targets through cloud cover, providing accurate firing solutions to the 5-inch 38 caliber guns. The shells, equipped with proximity fuses, did not need to make a direct hit. Detonating within a lethal radius was sufficient. The 5-inch 38 gun, a marvel of naval engineering, had a maximum effective range against aircraft of approximately 12,000 yards and a ceiling of 37,000 feet. Its rate of fire, 15 to 22 rounds per minute per barrel, meant that a single warship could unleash a devastating barrage. The radar, operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, could penetrate dense cloud formations, painting a clear picture of targets that were visually obscured. This combination effectively negated the visual sanctuary the Japanese pilots had long enjoyed. Production logs from U.S. naval yards indicated a steady increase in the deployment of these radar-equipped gun directors throughout 1942 and into 1943. By late 1943, nearly all major Allied warships in the Pacific were fitted with some form of radar-directed anti-aircraft capability. This widespread integration meant that the safe havens of cloud cover were diminishing rapidly across all operational theaters. The strategic implication was profound. Japanese air doctrine, which had emphasized surprise attacks and evasive maneuvers using natural cover, suddenly faced a technological counter. The perceived invulnerability of aircraft operating within clouds was shattered. This forced a reevaluation of attack profiles and escape routes, often leading to more exposed flight paths and increased attrition rates. The sky, once a domain of tactical freedom, was becoming increasingly constrained. Over China, 1944. The Mitsubishi Ki-46 Dyna, a twin-engine reconnaissance aircraft, banked gently, its crew trusting the thick, broken cumulus beneath them to obscure their approach to the American airfields near Chengdu. For years, the clouds had been a reliable ally, a shifting, opaque shield against interceptors and ground fire, allowing photographic runs at altitudes where visual detection was difficult and pursuit often futile. This day, however, the familiar comfort of the vaporous expanse would prove a lethal deception. Damage reports from downed aircraft and post-mission debriefings began to paint a consistent and alarming picture. Aircraft returning from reconnaissance missions over Allied-held territories, particularly those operating at medium altitudes, exhibited patterns of damage inconsistent with traditional visual anti-aircraft fire. Entry points for shrapnel were often clustered on the underside of the fuselage and wings, suggesting an attack vector from below through the very cloud cover that pilots believed offered protection. The trajectory analysis indicated a high degree of precision, far exceeding the capabilities of unguided anti-aircraft guns. The interrogation files of captured American ground crew and technical intelligence reports from recovered equipment fragments soon provided the explanation. The SCR-584 radar system, a mobile, truck-mounted unit, was being deployed with increasing frequency across Allied fronts. This system, operating at a frequency of 2700 to 2900 MHz, could detect aircraft at ranges up to 70 kilometers and, crucially, track them with an accuracy of 0.06 degrees in azimuth and elevation. Its associated M9 gun director, an analog computer, then calculated lead angles and fuse settings for the 90mm M1 anti-aircraft guns, feeding these solutions directly to the gun crews. The strategic implication was profound. The Japanese Army Air Force had long relied on the element of surprise and the cover of weather for its high-value reconnaissance missions. The Ki-46, with its exceptional speed and ceiling, was designed to exploit these conditions, often flying above or within cloud layers to avoid interception. With radar-guided anti-aircraft, these tactics became a liability. The clouds, once a sanctuary, now merely served as a blindfold for the pilots, allowing the radar to track them unimpeded while they remained oblivious to the impending danger until the bursts of flak erupted around them. Production logs from U.S. ordnance factories indicated that by mid-1944, over 1,500 SCR-584 units had been delivered, with production rates exceeding 150 units per month. This widespread deployment meant that the radar umbrella was no longer a localized threat, but a pervasive reality across all active fronts. The sheer volume of these systems ensured that any significant penetration of Allied airspace, particularly at altitudes between 5,000 and 10,000 meters, would almost certainly be met with radar-directed fire, regardless of visibility. The psychological impact on the aircrews was equally significant. Pilots, who had for years honed their skills in navigating by cloud formations and using them for evasion, now faced an invisible enemy that could see through their most trusted concealment. The sudden, unheralded explosions of flak from beneath the cloud deck instilled a new kind of dread, eroding confidence in established operational procedures. The clouds, once a symbol of safety, now held the potential for silent, unseen annihilation. The shift in aerial combat dynamics began subtly, its origins rooted in the incremental improvements of ground-based detection and interception. Japanese pilots, accustomed to the relative freedom of the vast Pacific skies, had long relied on visual cues and the cover of weather systems for tactical advantage. Their training emphasized individual skill and aggressive maneuvering, often at the expense of coordinated, large-scale interception strategies. The early war years confirmed this approach. American bombers, though formidable, were often detected visually or by rudimentary sound locators, allowing for sufficient warning to scramble interceptors. The introduction of radar-guided anti-aircraft systems, however, began to erode this established paradigm. Damage reports from American B-29 raids over Japan in late 1944 consistently noted an increase in accurate flak bursts at night and through cloud cover, areas where Japanese interceptors had previously struggled. These reports, compiled by intelligence analysts, detailed shrapnel patterns and impact locations that suggested a far more precise targeting mechanism than visual aiming. The integration of SCR-584 radar, initially developed for gun laying with proximity-fused shells, transformed the defensive landscape. This radar, operating on a frequency of 2,700 to 2,900 MHz, could track targets with an angular accuracy of 0.06 degrees and range accuracy of 25 yards, feeding real-time data directly to the M9 gun director. Production logs from American factories show the steady output of these systems. By January 1945, over 3,000 SCR-584 units had been deployed across various theaters, with a significant proportion earmarked for the Pacific. The proximity fuse, specifically the VT fuse, further amplified the lethality. Instead of relying on timed detonation, these fuses contained a miniature radar transmitter and receiver, detonating automatically when the shell passed within a lethal radius of the target. This innovation, according to ordnance inventories, accounted for 22% of all anti-aircraft ammunition expended by U.S. forces in the Pacific by March 1945, despite its higher unit cost. Strategically, this combination of radar and proximity fuses meant that the traditional evasive tactics of Japanese aircrews, particularly their reliance on cloud cover for concealment, became increasingly perilous. The perceived safety of flying above or within dense weather formations diminished as ground defenses could now engage targets they could not visually acquire. Interrogation files of captured Japanese pilots from mid-1945 frequently contained accounts of unexpected and accurate flak bursts during night missions or through overcast conditions, leading to a palpable sense of vulnerability. "The clouds no longer protect us," one pilot reported, a sentiment echoed in multiple debriefings. The ideological implication of this shift was profound. The Japanese military doctrine, which often emphasized the spiritual strength and individual prowess of its pilots, found itself confronting a technological disparity that negated these advantages. While Japanese radar development lagged significantly, their anti-aircraft systems remained largely optical-mechanical. This created a strategic asymmetry where American ground defenses could engage targets with increasing precision regardless of visibility, while Japanese interceptors still grappled with the inherent limitations of visual acquisition, especially at night or in adverse weather. The psychological toll on Japanese aircrews was evident in unit diaries, which began to record a higher incidence of combat fatigue and a declining enthusiasm for night interception sorties. The gradual erosion of the perceived sanctuary offered by the skies above Japan forced a reevaluation of defensive strategies. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Force and Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, already depleted by attrition, found their remaining assets increasingly exposed. The operational reports from the 35th Fighter Group, flying P-51 Mustangs on escort missions over Japan, noted a marked decrease in aggressive Japanese interceptor